Was Jesus a Buddhist monk who lived in India for 18 years? Welcome back to Mind Podcast. The life of Jesus Christ, one of the most famous figures in history, actually has a mysterious gap that has been concealed for 2 millennia. Neither the Bible nor Western or Middle Eastern documents record where Jesus was or what he was doing in Palestine between the ages of 12 and 29. These years have become a hidden period, referred to as the lost years. Until a remarkable discovery was made by an explorer in 1887, let's uncover this mystery in today's video. In the late 19th century, Russian journalist Nicholas Notovich traveled across India, Tibet, and Afghanistan. He documented his experiences and discoveries in a book titled The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, published in 1894. The story begins in 1887 when Notovich traveled to India and Central Asia. Although he called it traveling, in reality, Notovich had a grander mission: to travel south from Russia to document the customs and distinctive cultures of the area, particularly surveying the geography to create maps for the expansion of the Russian Empire. By the late 19th century, the Russian and British empires were fiercely competing for influence in Central Asia. It was also a time when explorers like Notovich were highly respected, and marrying an explorer was considered a great honor for any woman. During his journey, Notovich traveled from north to south, passing through the mountainous regions of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Eventually, he stopped in Ladakh with the majestic snow-capped hills of the Himalayas. Then, he circled back to Xinjiang to return to Russia. While in Ladakh, Notovich visited a local Lama monastery named Hemis. Inside, the monastery worshipped Padmasambhava, indicating it was a monastery of Tibetan tantric monks. Notovich was warmly welcomed by the lamas. They conversed and drank tea all night. The lamas' stories opened Notovich's eyes. He was surprised that the lamas were not only well-versed in Buddhism, but also knowledgeable in various fields of science. The Lama then said that Western Christianity was very similar to Tibetan Buddhism, and provided a series of evidence that left Notovich astonished. He wondered how a Lama living in the mountains could know so much about Christianity. Before Notovich could react, the Lama astonishingly stated that Jesus was a great Buddha. He came into the world to save all beings and give them the right faith. This information left Notovich completely unsettled. Numerous questions flooded his mind. Was Jesus connected to the Eastern Buddha? Why wasn't this documented anywhere? Notovich began to suspect that the Lama was trying to deceive him, but the Lama continued, Jesus was a great prophet. We call him a prophet, one of the first prophets after the 22 Buddhas. He was wonderful. He lived in the East during his youth, but died among those without true faith. We were very saddened by this information. Notovich, sipping his tea, nearly spat it out. What did you say? Did I hear wrong? Jesus actually traveled to the East? Notovich lost his composure because he was a devout Christian. He had memorized the Bible from a young age and knew what the Bible said about Jesus' life. There was a significant gap from when Jesus was 12 to 29 years old. These 18 years were not mentioned in the Bible, with no clues, and no one knew where he was or what he did, as if he had vanished from Israel. Notovich stammered and asked, Do you have any evidence? The Lama calmly replied, It is recorded in our sacred texts, titled The Accounts of the Prophet Isa. Notovich stood up abruptly, knelt before the Lama, and begged him to read it to him. If this was true, it would be a historic revelation. The Lama replied, I don't have the original here. Sorry, the original is written in Pali and is currently preserved in Lhasa, Tibet. Notovich, an explorer with the zeal of a journalist for hot news, wanted to fly to Lhasa immediately. That night, Notovich tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The Lama's story echoed in his mind. He recalled that the New Testament described Jesus' life as follows. Each year, Jesus' parents took him to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. This was a traditional Jewish festival commemorating Yahweh, who had punished the Egyptians to protect the Israelites. It also symbolized the time when God spared the Israelites from the plague that killed the firstborn sons in Egypt. On this day, God instructed the Israelites to kill a lamb and mark their doors with its blood as a sign for the angels to pass over their homes. That year, Jesus' parents took the family to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. Jesus, then 12 years old, stayed behind in Jerusalem without his parents knowing. They thought he was with the traveling group. Not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." Jesus replied, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he meant. They took him home, and after that, there were no records of Jesus until he reappeared as a 30-year-old man, diligently preaching and saving people. Therefore, the knowledge about Jesus' empty historical period always remained controversial. Many said it was not hard to guess. Naturally, Jesus' childhood was like everyone else's, helping his parents with household chores. It was evident. Now Notovich heard that Lhasa had records of Jesus' life, including the lost years. He couldn't wait another moment and decided to head to Lhasa the next morning. At dawn, the enthusiastic young man set off towards the northeast, heading straight for Lhasa. Unfortunately, after only a few miles, Notovich slipped on a rocky hill and broke his leg. Thus his goal to reach Lhasa had to be postponed. He asked for help and was taken back to the Hemis monastery, where the monks assisted him. Back at the monastery, the lamas were pleased to see he only had minor injuries, as they knew the terrain was difficult to traverse. They continued to treat Notovich kindly and helped him heal his wounds. While resting, the same lama who had spoken to him the previous day visited him again. Since the lama had mentioned the biography of the prophet Isa, he slowly said that, although they did not have the original Pali text, they had a Tibetan translation they occasionally read. Notovich didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wondered why the lama hadn't mentioned this earlier. If he had known, he wouldn't have rushed to Lhasa and broken his leg. The lama simply replied that it was fate. Notovich eagerly asked the lama to read everything about the prophet Isa. The lama smiled and said that the biography left by Jesus was naturally a gift to humanity, and he was happy to share it. They talked all night, with the lama narrating and Notovich diligently recording every word. A few days later, after recovering from his injury, Notovich left the monastery. He had collected the complete biography and experiences of Jesus during his years in the East. The story began with a 13-year-old boy named Isa. This was the age at which one could marry according to Israeli tradition. For a talented and intelligent young man like Isa, it was not surprising that many families visited and proposed, hoping he would become their son-in-law. But that year, on a beautiful day, Isa left home. Isa joined a caravan led by Indian traders. Around the 1st century BCE, equivalent to China's Han Dynasty, the overland Silk Road had been established, connecting the Mediterranean coast to the interior of modern-day China. This made travel and trade between these regions easy and common. Isa arrived in India at the age of 14. He settled there for a while, joining local meditation groups and learning from distinguished monks. Isa was exceptionally intelligent and knowledgeable, quickly becoming famous wherever he went. Therefore, many people from other places wanted to meet him. Some wanted to adopt him as a son, while others wanted him to marry their daughters. But Isa politely declined these offers. He then went to the Jagannath Temple in Puri, one of the most famous and mysterious ancient temples, dedicated to the worship of Krishna, also known as the god of the sky. He is an incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu. The people there believe that inside the statue of Krishna lay his actual heart. The priests at the Jagannath Temple welcomed Isa. They taught him to read and understand the Vedas, practiced yoga, and healed illnesses through prayer. They explained the scriptures to Isa and taught him to learn from everyone throughout his life. The goal of all this training was for Isa to attain enlightenment like the Buddha, gaining divine abilities. It is worth mentioning that Hinduism and Buddhism coexisted and developed side by side at that time, even blending to create the unique culture of India that persists to this day. Some sects of Hinduism believe that the Buddha was an incarnation of the great god Vishnu. Tibetan Buddhism later became the clearest manifestation of this blend, including yoga practices we've explored in previous videos. After learning from various religions and cultures, Isa lived in holy cities like Varanasi and many other places for 6 years. The locals loved Isa because he treated the lower castes, the Vaishyas and Shudras, fairly and even preached to them. It is important to note that ancient India's caste system divided society into 4 classes, ranked from highest to lowest. The first class was the Brahmins, who were priests and held the highest status. The second class was the Kshatriyas, who were nobles or warriors. The third class was the Vaishyas, who were commoners and farmers. The fourth class was the Shudras, who were slaves and manual laborers. Beyond these 4 classes were the untouchables, who could not access the teachings of the higher classes. According to Hindu teachings, Brahmins were created from the mouth of Brahma, representing divine speech, making them the most noble. Kshatriyas were created from Brahma's arms, while Vaishyas and Shudras were created from his thighs and feet, respectively. The Vaishyas could only hear the Vedic hymns recited by priests during festivals, while the Shudras were forbidden from seeing or hearing the Vedas. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas were upset to see Isa regularly associating with the lower classes. They told Isa that the lowly Vaishyas and Shudras should not be allowed to hear the same teachings as the noble Brahmins and Kshatriyas. Brahma forbade them from approaching the Vaishyas and Shudras because Brahma did not permit them to hear the scriptures unless they were reborn as Brahmins or Kshatriyas after death. But Isa ignored these words because, in his eyes, the Creator made no distinctions among his children, regardless of their social class. To the Creator, they were all the same. Isa continued preaching to the lower classes, embarrassing the Brahmins. They secretly conspired to deal with the young man, at the very least expelling him, and some even suggested assassinating Isa. But locals always warned Isa in advance, allowing him to move to other places to study and preach. After 6 years of learning, Isa mastered Pali and the Vedic scriptures, then began preaching across India, teaching people not to worship idols, not to perform sacrifices, but to follow the humanistic teachings he imparted. Isa wholeheartedly preached his teachings, and at the age of 29, he returned to his homeland of Israel, officially beginning the stories recorded in the New Testament. Notovich documented this biography of the prophet Isa. 7 years after returning to Europe, in 1894, he published The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, which included his records of Isa's life. Notovich wrote that Jesus' 18 lost years were not empty at all. On the contrary, they were incredibly rich and important years. He had left Israel for India, where he studied Buddhism and Hinduism before returning to Israel. The book was immediately met with fierce criticism from Bible scholars. They unanimously claimed that Notovich was speaking nonsense. How could he connect the divine Jesus with the heretical teachings of India? Because Notovich's book implied that Jesus' teachings were the result of his studies and travels in India, it suggested that Christianity developed from Buddhism. This made it seem as if Jesus was not the son of an omnipotent God. Later, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity identified Jesus as God. Being God, he would naturally know everything from birth, unlike humans who need to travel and learn. Most scholars who opposed Notovich said his book was fabricated for profit. Even Dr. John, a leading contemporary Bible scholar, stated that no recognized scholar on earth doubted that Jesus was God. Notovich's story earned him money and fame from his hoax. After 1916, Notovich retired and did not respond to these criticisms. Some scholars courageously spoke out in support of Notovich. Among them were influential figures. The first to speak was Fida Hasnain, the curator of the National Museum of Kashmir and an archaeologist. He was also fluent in Arabic, ancient Sanskrit, and Persian. Hasnain said he had reviewed historical documents about the places Notovich visited and found that the names and individuals Notovich mentioned were real people, not fictional characters. Explorer John Houston, president of the Royal Geographical Society, also provided solid evidence. He had led British expeditions to Tibet. He said he met Notovich when leaving Lhasa, not far from the Hemis Monastery, and the two had spoken. Another supporter, Swami Abhidananda, an Indian sage and renowned Vedic scholar who had traveled to Tibet and mastered Buddhist studies, initially doubted Notovich's story. However, in 1922, driven by excitement, Swami personally visited the Hemis monastery to verify the story. The lamas there confirmed that Notovich had indeed broken his thigh and stayed at the monastery for 40 days to heal. They also confirmed that the monastery had manuscripts related to Isa's biography and that Notovich's account was based on these texts. Swami was convinced. He asked to see the contents of the biography, and the lamas willingly shared and even showed him the handwritten manuscript. Seeing it, Swami could not deny the truth of Notovich's words. The manuscript had 14 chapters with 223 pairs of verses, exactly matching Notovich's account. With the help of the lamas, Swami translated part of the manuscript. In his published travelogue, Swami included 40 verses from it and cited Notovich's book as a reference. It seems likely that Jesus did spend 18 years in India studying. Of course, the teachings he imparted were not related to Buddhism, but originated directly from Jewish traditions. Many sages have undergone similar experiences. For example, before attaining enlightenment, the Buddha studied with Arata Kalama, a great sage of the Samkhya school in ancient India, and Udraka Ramaputra in meditation. This process was the stepping stone to his ultimate achievement, the key to his fundamental enlightenment, and not the final content of his teachings. Similarly, Jesus may have gone through such a process. The reason Jesus did not recount this journey to his disciples may be explored in future videos. Thank you for watching.